A flight attendant messed up with a black family, and what happened later will shock you. So watch till the end. The bustling airport was alive with the usual hum of announcements, hurried footsteps, and excited chatter. Among the travelers was the Johnson family, a husband, wife, and their 2 young children. This wasn't just any flight for them. It marked the beginning of a long-awaited vacation they had been saving up for years. Mr. Johnson, a high school teacher, and Mrs. Johnson, a nurse, had been working tirelessly, often sacrificing their own leisure to prioritize their children's needs. But this time, they decided it was their turn to take a break and create cherished memories together. As they approached the boarding gate, their youngest child clutched a teddy bear tightly, her eyes wide with wonder at the planes outside. "Are we really flying, Daddy?" she asked. Mr. Johnson smiled and nodded, gently ruffling her curls. This trip symbolized not just a getaway but a celebration of their resilience as a family. They boarded the plane with anticipation, oblivious to the challenges they would soon face. The Johnson family was the picture of joy as they navigated their way to their seats. Mr. Johnson held the boarding passes while Mrs. Johnson managed their carry-on bags. Their oldest son, a curious 10-year-old, peppered his parents with questions about how airplanes worked, his excitement palpable. The little girl, just 5 years old, clung to her mother, still adjusting to the bustling atmosphere around her. The parents exchanged amused glances, their hearts full as they prepared for the adventure ahead. But the joy wasn't just in the trip, it was in being together. The parents often worked long shifts, and their time as a family was often limited to weekends or brief moments before bedtime. This vacation was a rare opportunity to pause, breathe, and appreciate each other's company. They were determined to make every moment count. Little did they know, their journey would take an unexpected turn, testing their unity in ways they couldn't have imagined. As the Johnsons settled into their seats, they faced a common but frustrating task: finding space in the overhead bins. The family had packed light, but even their compact bags seemed to pose a challenge in the already crowded compartments. Mr. Johnson stretched up to shift a bulky suitcase, hoping to create enough room for their belongings. Mrs. Johnson stood nearby, holding their youngest in one arm while keeping an eye on their son. She offered quiet encouragement to her husband, though she couldn't help but notice the stares of a few impatient passengers. One of those staring was a flight attendant with a stern expression. She stood at the end of the aisle, her gaze fixed on the family. Instead of offering assistance, she folded her arms and tapped her foot impatiently. "We need everyone seated," she barked, loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Her tone carried more annoyance than professionalism, sending a ripple of discomfort through the cabin. The Johnsons exchanged uneasy glances but continued their efforts to fit their bags. They didn't want trouble, they just wanted to start their trip in peace. The flight attendant finally strode down the aisle toward the Johnsons, her frustration now evident to everyone nearby. "This is taking too long," she snapped, her voice sharp and cutting. Mr. Johnson turned to her, his tone polite but firm. "We're almost done. Just a moment, please," he said, lifting their final bag into the bin. But the attendant didn't seem satisfied. She gestured dramatically toward the aisle. "You're blocking traffic and delaying the flight," she exclaimed. Passengers nearby shifted in their seats, sensing the tension. Some muttered in defense of the family, while others averted their eyes to avoid getting involved. Mrs. Johnson, balancing her daughter on her hip, spoke up. "We're doing our best. There's no need to raise your voice." Her calmness seemed to only aggravate the attendant further. "Maybe you should have been more organized before boarding," the woman shot back, her words dripping with condescension. The Johnsons were stunned, feeling the weight of embarrassment and frustration as the conflict unfolded before a captive audience. Around the family, a growing unease settled over the cabin. Passengers exchanged glances, some clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation. A man in the row across from the Johnsons fidgeted with his phone, as though considering recording the incident. A young woman seated nearby whispered to her companion that wasn't necessary, but quickly fell silent when the attendant glared in her direction. No one seemed willing to step forward, leaving the Johnsons to fend for themselves. The Johnson children, sensing the tension, became visibly upset. Their son clutched his father's arm, while the youngest buried her face in her mother's shoulder. "We don't want any trouble," Mr. Johnson said again, his voice quieter this time. But the attendant's disapproving gaze didn't waver. The family felt isolated, as though the crowd's silence only deepened their vulnerability. It was a moment that should have been filled with excitement and joy but was now tainted by humiliation and unease. The flight attendant's patience seemed to have run out. "This isn't rocket science," she exclaimed, her voice cutting through the cabin noise. "You're holding everyone up." The accusation hung in the air, and several passengers turned their attention to the scene. Mr. Johnson's brows furrowed, but he kept his tone measured. "Ma'am, we're just trying to store our bags. It's a tight fit, but we'll be done in a moment." His calm response only seemed to fuel the attendant's ire. She gestured toward the aisle behind them, where a few passengers waited to pass. "You're creating a scene and making everyone uncomfortable," she added sharply, as though placing the blame squarely on the Johnsons. Mrs. Johnson glanced around at the passengers, noting the awkward looks but also sensing quiet support in their eyes. Despite the humiliation, she kept her composure. "We're sorry for the delay," she said softly, her voice tinged with frustration. "We're almost finished." But the damage was already done. Their journey had taken a disheartening turn. Mr. Johnson took a deep breath, doing his best to keep his frustration in check. He turned to the flight attendant, hoping reason would prevail. "We understand the need to move quickly," he said, his voice steady. "But with 2 young kids, it can take a little extra time to get settled. We're not trying to inconvenience anyone." His words were meant to diffuse the situation, but the attendant appeared unmoved. Instead, she rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. "That's not my problem," she retorted. "You should have been ready before boarding." Her dismissive attitude stung, but Mr. Johnson refused to let his temper flare. Mrs. Johnson placed a reassuring hand on his arm, silently urging him to stay calm. Their children watched the exchange with wide, nervous eyes, sensing the tension in the air. Around them, passengers whispered in hushed tones, but no one spoke up in their defense. The Johnsons felt the weight of the moment pressing down on them, their initial excitement replaced by a growing sense of humiliation. The tension escalated as the flight attendant raised her voice even further, ensuring the entire cabin was now tuned into the conflict. "I've had enough of this," she declared. "You're holding up the entire flight with your lack of preparedness." Her words were like a slap in the face, echoing with accusation. Mrs. Johnson stepped forward, her tone firm but calm. "We're doing everything we can. There's no need to shout." The attendant glared at her, seemingly offended by the mother's composed demeanor. "If you can't follow basic boarding procedures, maybe you shouldn't be flying at all," she said, her tone dripping with disdain. A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Mrs. Johnson's jaw tightened, but she held her ground. Mr. Johnson clenched his fists at his sides, willing himself to remain composed for the sake of his family. At that moment, their children clung to them, their vacation already overshadowed by the weight of the flight attendant's hostility. Determined to shield her family from further embarrassment, Mrs. Johnson addressed the attendant directly. "We understand you have a job to do," she said, her voice steady. "But we deserve to be treated with respect, just like any other passengers." Her words were measured but carried a quiet strength that momentarily silenced the attendant. Some passengers nodded subtly in agreement, though none spoke up. The flight attendant's face hardened. "Respect goes both ways," she snapped, refusing to back down. "I don't have time to babysit every family that can't follow the rules." The words stung, but Mrs. Johnson stood tall, refusing to let the woman's attitude intimidate her. "We're not asking for special treatment," she said firmly. "We're asking for basic courtesy." Her statement hung in the air, resonating with the passengers around them. But before anyone could step in, the flight attendant turned on her heel and stormed toward the front of the plane, leaving the family to brace for what was to come. Moments later, the Johnsons' worst fears were realized. The flight attendant reappeared at the head of the aisle, this time accompanied by 2 uniformed security officers. "This family is disrupting the boarding process," she announced, pointing an accusatory finger at the Johnsons. Gasps of disbelief filled the cabin as passengers watched the situation spiral further out of control. Mr. Johnson instinctively stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We're not causing any trouble," he said firmly. "We've already stored our bags and are ready to sit down." But the officers had already been briefed with the attendant's version of events. "We've been asked to escort you off the plane," one of them said, his tone curt. Mrs. Johnson felt her stomach drop. "This is a mistake," she insisted, clutching her daughter tightly. Around them, murmurs of disapproval began to ripple through the cabin. Passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pulling out their phones to record the incident. Despite their protests, the Johnsons were left with no choice but to gather their belongings and follow the officers down the aisle. Their dream vacation had turned into a nightmare. As the Johnson family walked down the aisle, escorted by security, their youngest daughter clutched her mother's neck tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Why are we leaving, Mommy?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Mrs. Johnson couldn't bring herself to answer. Her son trailed behind, his excitement for the trip replaced by confusion and embarrassment. Mr. Johnson held his head high, determined not to let their dignity falter, even under the piercing gazes of the passengers. Behind them, whispers turned into murmurs of disapproval. Several passengers discreetly pulled out their phones, recording the heartbreaking scene. One man muttered, "This is wrong," while another whispered to his neighbor, "That family didn't deserve this." But no one openly intervened. The cabin was a mix of outrage and awkward silence as the family made their way off the plane, leaving behind what should have been the start of a joyous journey. Once outside the plane, the Johnsons gathered their children close, trying to shield them from the emotional toll of what had just occurred. "It's okay, sweetheart," Mrs. Johnson murmured to her daughter, gently wiping away her tears. Her voice was soothing, though her own eyes brimmed with unshed tears. Mr. Johnson knelt to his son's level, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes, people don't treat others fairly," he explained gently, "but that doesn't mean we stop standing up for what's right." The children clung to their parents, seeking solace in their reassuring presence. The airport staff nearby avoided eye contact, clearly uncomfortable with the situation but unwilling to intervene. Mrs. Johnson glanced at her husband, her expression a mix of sadness and quiet resolve. "This isn't over," she said softly, her voice steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. Mr. Johnson nodded in agreement, silently vowing to turn this painful experience into something meaningful for their family. Unbeknownst to the Johnsons, several passengers had already uploaded videos of the incident to social media. The clips quickly went viral, capturing the flight attendants' hostility, the family's polite demeanor, and their heartbreaking walk off the plane. Within hours, hashtags like #FamilyDeservesRespect and #AirlineScandal began trending. People from all walks of life expressed their outrage, calling out the airline for its apparent mistreatment of the family. Comments flooded the videos, with users demanding accountability. "How can an airline treat paying customers like this?" one user wrote. "That family handled it with more grace than I ever could," another added. Influencers and activists shared the videos, amplifying the Johnson story to an even larger audience. The incident struck a chord with many, reigniting conversations about fairness, dignity, and the customer service standards of major airlines. The next day, major news outlets picked up the story, replaying the viral videos and interviewing passengers who had witnessed the event. Reporters framed the incident as a clear case of mistreatment, and headlines like "Family Forced Off Plane Sparks Nationwide Debates" dominated the airwaves. Several passengers from the flight came forward, corroborating the Johnsons' version of events and criticizing the flight attendants' behavior. Social media users began tagging the airline in posts, demanding answers. Activists called for a boycott, urging the company to take responsibility for what had happened. The Johnson family, still reeling from the incident, found themselves at the center of a national conversation. Though they hadn't asked for the spotlight, they realized that their story resonated with countless others who had experienced similar injustices. In an attempt to quell the growing outrage, the airline released a public statement. "We regret any inconvenience experienced by our passengers and are committed to ensuring a safe and comfortable environment for all," it read. However, the statement fell flat, with many accusing the airline of sidestepping responsibility. "Where's the apology to the family?" one commenter demanded. "This isn't a regret, it's a cover-up," wrote another. Criticism of the airline intensified, with customers canceling their flights and influencers publicly denouncing the company. The Johnsons, meanwhile, remained quiet, unsure of how to navigate their newfound visibility. But as the backlash grew, so did opportunities to turn their painful experience into a platform for change. The family began to consider how they could use this moment to challenge the status quo and advocate for fairness and respect in the airline industry. Amid the media frenzy, the Johnsons received an unexpected call from a high-profile civil rights attorney, Samantha Carter. Known for her relentless pursuit of justice, Carter had seen the viral videos and was appalled by the treatment the family had endured. "I believe your family deserves justice," she told Mr. Johnson over the phone. "I'm prepared to represent you, free of charge, to hold the airline accountable for their actions." The Johnsons were initially hesitant. They hadn't planned to turn the incident into a legal battle, but Carter's passion and assurance gave them confidence. "This isn't just about your family," Carter explained. "It's about setting a precedent so no one else has to go through what you did." After a family discussion, the Johnsons agreed to move forward. The lawyer quickly filed a lawsuit, citing discrimination and emotional distress, drawing even more attention to the case. As news of the lawsuit broke, the public rallied around the Johnson family. Support poured in from all corners of the country, with people sharing their own stories of mistreatment and discrimination in various industries. Activist groups joined the cause, organizing rallies and online campaigns demanding justice for the Johnsons and accountability from the airline. The Johnsons found themselves at the forefront of a growing movement, their story symbolizing a fight for fairness and respect. While the lawsuit progressed, their lawyer held press conferences, emphasizing the broader implications of the case. "This isn't just about one family," Carter told reporters. "It's about ensuring that everyone is treated with dignity, no matter their race or background." The family's courage inspired others to speak out, turning their personal ordeal into a powerful call for change. The airline, now under intense scrutiny, scrambled to manage the public relations disaster. Executives met behind closed doors to devise a strategy, but each move seemed to backfire. Attempts to defend the flight attendants' actions only fueled more backlash, with critics accusing the company of failing to address systemic issues within its staff training and policies. Shareholders began voicing concerns as the airline's stock prices took a hit. Customers canceled flights in droves, vowing to boycott the company until meaningful changes were made. The airline CEO appeared on a major news network, offering a tepid apology that was widely criticized as insincere. "This family deserves better," he said, but his lack of specifics only deepened public frustration. The company's failure to properly address the incident left it floundering in a sea of negative press. As the lawsuit gained traction, celebrities and influencers began sharing the Johnson family's story on social media. High-profile figures like actors, musicians, and athletes expressed their outrage, tagging the airline and urging their followers to stand with the family. "Discrimination has no place in our skies or anywhere else," one A-list actor tweeted. The added attention propelled the story to new heights, making it impossible for the airline to ignore. Influencers with millions of followers created posts dissecting the incident and urging people to boycott the airline. The Johnsons were overwhelmed by the support but remained grounded, focusing on their children and navigating their newfound role as advocates for change. The groundswell of celebrity support brought a sense of vindication, but it also put more pressure on the airline to take meaningful action. As the lawsuit unfolded, Samantha Carter and her legal team unearthed troubling details about the airline's internal operations. Documents and testimonies revealed a pattern of similar complaints against staff, particularly regarding discrimination and customer mistreatment. Former employees came forward, sharing stories of inadequate diversity training and a culture that prioritized speed over compassion. These revelations were damning. News outlets seized on the findings, airing exposés that painted the airline in an unflattering light. Public opinion shifted even further against the company, with many calling for a complete overhaul of its policies. For the Johnson family, the revelations were bittersweet. They validated their experience but also highlighted the depth of the problem. Mr. Johnson remarked in an interview, "We didn't ask for this fight, but now that we're in it, we want to make sure it counts, for everyone." Facing mounting legal pressure and public outrage, the airline reached out to Samantha Carter with an offer to settle the case privately. The proposal included a substantial financial compensation package and a non-disclosure agreement, NDA, to prevent the Johnson family from speaking publicly about the incident. "This will help us all move forward," the airline's representative insisted during a tense meeting. However, Carter immediately rejected the offer. "This isn't just about money," she told them. "The Johnsons want accountability and systemic change, not hush money." The airline's attempt to quietly resolve the case only strengthened public sympathy for the family. Mrs. Johnson later commented, "We could have taken the easy way out, but our goal is bigger than that. We want to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." With their case gaining national attention, the Johnson family used their platform to advocate for broader change in the airline industry. They partnered with civil rights organizations to push for improved customer service training and stricter anti-discrimination policies. "This isn't just about our family, it's about creating a better experience for all travelers," Mr. Johnson told a packed audience during a televised panel discussion. The family's story resonated deeply with the public. Mrs. Johnson shared personal anecdotes about the emotional toll the incident had taken on their children, while Mr. Johnson emphasized the importance of standing up against injustice. Their advocacy efforts inspired others to share their own experiences, creating a groundswell of support for reform. The Johnsons had transformed their pain into purpose, becoming a symbol of resilience and hope. As public support for the Johnsons grew, the airline faced mounting pressure from both its employees and customers. Staff members began speaking out about their own frustrations, revealing long-standing issues with inadequate training and a toxic work culture. Many employees demanded better diversity and sensitivity training, while some threatened to strike if meaningful changes weren't implemented. Externally, activists organized protests at the airline's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Accountability Now" and "Justice for the Johnsons." Shareholders called emergency meetings, urging the company to address the situation before it caused further financial damage. The airline had no choice but to announce sweeping reforms, including mandatory sensitivity training and a commitment to revisiting its hiring practices. However, critics argued that these measures were too little, too late. Amid the turmoil, a former airline employee stepped forward with explosive allegations. The whistleblower, who had worked in the corporate office, leaked emails and internal memos that revealed a pattern of dismissing customer complaints, particularly those involving minority passengers. They cared more about avoiding lawsuits than addressing the root causes of these issues, the whistleblower revealed in an exclusive interview with a major news outlet. The leaked documents painted a picture of systemic negligence and indifference, fueling even greater public outrage. Activists called for a federal investigation into the airline's practices, and lawmakers began discussing new regulations to protect passengers from discrimination. The whistleblower's revelations added another layer of complexity to the Johnsons' case, bolstering their claims and turning their fight into a national reckoning for the airline industry. In a desperate bid to avoid a prolonged legal battle, the airline returned with an even larger settlement offer, doubling the initial amount. This time, they included promises of policy changes as part of the agreement. However, the offer still required the Johnsons to sign an NDA, silencing them permanently. Samantha Carter, once again, advised the family to reject it. "We've come too far to back down now," Mrs. Johnson declared during a family meeting. Her husband agreed, adding, "Accepting this would mean letting them off the hook. This fight is about more than just us." The family's refusal to settle further endeared them to the public, who admired their unwavering commitment to justice. Their decision sent a powerful message. Some principles are worth more than money. The mounting scandal reached a boiling point when the airline's CEO announced his resignation during a live press conference. "I take full responsibility for the failures in our company's policies and culture that led to this incident," he stated, his voice somber. Though he insisted his departure was voluntary, many speculated that internal and external pressures had forced his hand. The resignation was met with mixed reactions. While some saw it as a step toward accountability, others criticized it as a symbolic gesture that wouldn't address the systemic issues within the airline. Activists and the Johnson family emphasized that real change required more than leadership turnover. Replacing one person isn't enough, Samantha Carter said in a televised interview. The entire culture needs to shift. Amid the chaos, the Johnson children, 12-year-old Maya and 9-year-old Liam, became unexpected voices for change. Maya, an aspiring writer, penned a heartfelt letter about her experience on the flight, which her parents shared online. The letter quickly went viral, touching hearts around the world. "I didn't understand why they treated us differently," she wrote. "But I know it wasn't fair, and I don't want other kids to feel the way I did." Inspired by Maya's words, young activists across the country launched a campaign called Fly Fair, advocating for equal treatment for all passengers. Schools organized letter-writing campaigns, and youth groups created videos demanding accountability from airlines. The Johnson family was moved by the groundswell of support. "Our kids are proof that even the youngest voices can drive meaningful change," Mr. Johnson said proudly. The public outcry and mounting evidence prompted federal authorities to launch a formal investigation into the airline's practices. Led by the Department of Transportation, the inquiry aimed to uncover whether the airline had violated anti-discrimination laws. Investigators also looked into broader patterns of misconduct in the industry, signaling that the Johnsons' case could have far-reaching implications. The investigation put additional pressure on the airline, which now faced the prospect of significant fines and stricter regulations. For the Johnson family, the announcement was a victory. "This isn't just about our case anymore," Mrs. Johnson said during a press conference. "It's about holding an entire industry accountable for how it treats people." The investigation became a pivotal moment in the fight for fair treatment, with the Johnsons at the forefront. As the Johnsons' story continued to dominate headlines, publishers, filmmakers, and producers approached the family with offers to document their journey. From book deals to movie scripts, the family was inundated with opportunities to share their experiences on a larger scale. While flattered, they approached these offers cautiously, determined to maintain control over their narrative. "We don't want our story to be sensationalized," Mr. Johnson said in an interview. "If we do this, it will be to inspire others and create real change." Ultimately, the family agreed to partner with a respected filmmaker for a documentary that would highlight their fight for justice and the systemic issues they uncovered. The project promised to bring even more awareness to the discrimination faced by countless others. The Johnsons' refusal to settle and their commitment to justice inspired people around the world to contribute to their cause. Crowdfunding campaigns raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to support the family's legal fees and advocacy work. "This isn't just for us," Mrs. Johnson explained in a heartfelt video thanking their supporters. "Your contributions are helping us fight for everyone who's ever been mistreated." The donations allowed the family to expand their efforts, funding initiatives like diversity training programs for businesses and advocacy campaigns for better customer rights. The overwhelming support reinforced the Johnsons' belief in the power of community. "We never imagined that so many people would stand with us," Mr. Johnson said. "It shows that people truly care about fairness and justice." Fueled by the overwhelming public support and donations, the Johnson family established the Wings of Justice Foundation to combat discrimination and promote equality across industries. The foundation's mission was to provide resources for individuals who faced similar injustices and to advocate for systemic reforms in corporate policies. The launch of the foundation was met with widespread acclaim. At the inaugural press conference, Mrs. Johnson shared their vision. "We want to turn our painful experience into something positive, something that can create lasting change." The foundation quickly gained traction, partnering with civil rights organizations and launching programs to provide legal aid and sensitivity training for corporations. The Johnsons' initiative became a beacon of hope, proving that personal adversity could spark meaningful progress. The Johnsons' fight sparked a ripple effect throughout the airline industry. Competing airlines, eager to avoid similar scandals, began implementing reforms. Mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for employees became the norm, while policies for handling customer complaints were revamped to ensure fairness and accountability. For the Johnsons, this was a significant victory. When industries start taking proactive steps, it shows the power of collective action, Mr. Johnson said during a televised interview. While their case was far from over, the family was heartened to see their efforts influencing change on such a large scale. The reforms marked a turning point, with the Johnson story serving as a catalyst for a more inclusive travel experience for all passengers. The Johnson family was invited to testify before a congressional committee investigating systemic discrimination in the airline industry. Their testimony was emotional and powerful, with each family member sharing their perspective on the ordeal. Maya's heartfelt words brought some committee members to tears. No one should feel less important because of their skin color. I hope no other kid has to feel what I felt. The testimony highlighted broader issues within the industry, sparking bipartisan calls for stricter regulations and oversight. Legislators praised the Johnsons for their bravery, promising to introduce policies to ensure fair treatment for all travelers. The family left the hearing feeling empowered, knowing their story was helping to drive meaningful change at the highest levels of government. Under intense scrutiny, the airline announced a comprehensive plan to address the issues exposed by the Johnsons' case. The CEO's successor held a press conference, detailing a multi-million-dollar initiative to improve employee training, increase diversity in leadership, and create an independent oversight committee to handle customer complaints. The Johnson family cautiously welcomed the announcement. "It's a step in the right direction, but actions speak louder than words," Samantha Carter said, urging the airline to follow through on its promises. While critics remained skeptical, many saw the pledge as a sign of progress, crediting the Johnsons for forcing the airline to confront its shortcomings. After months of legal battles, the court delivered a landmark ruling in favor of the Johnson family. The judge cited overwhelming evidence of discrimination, ordering the airline to pay significant damages and implement mandatory policy changes. The verdict was celebrated as a victory for civil rights and a turning point in the fight against systemic bias. The Johnsons were overjoyed but humble in their response. "This isn't just a win for us, it's a win for anyone who's ever felt powerless in the face of injustice," Mr. Johnson said during a press conference. Samantha Carter hailed the ruling as historic, emphasizing its implications for other industries. The verdict solidified the Johnsons' role as trailblazers in the fight for equality. Encouraged by public interest, the Johnsons collaborated with a renowned author to publish a memoir detailing their journey. Titled Turbulence to Triumph, The Johnson Family's Fight for Justice, the book quickly became a bestseller, inspiring readers with its raw honesty and powerful message of resilience. In the book, each family member shared their perspective, offering insights into the emotional and legal battles they faced. Maya's chapter, in particular, resonated with young readers, while Liam's reflections provided a poignant look at how children perceive injustice. The book's success further amplified their story, solidifying their legacy as advocates for change. After winning their case, the Johnson family chose to use a significant portion of their settlement to launch programs aimed at uplifting marginalized communities. They invested in scholarships for underprivileged students, funded initiatives promoting diversity in corporate environments, and supported grassroots organizations fighting discrimination. "We want to ensure that the impact of this case extends far beyond us," Mrs. Johnson explained at the unveiling of their first program, a mentorship initiative for aspiring minority professionals. The programs quickly gained traction, changing lives and fostering hope in underserved areas. The family's decision to give back reinforced their role as leaders in the fight for equality and social progress. The Johnsons' journey caught the attention of Hollywood, leading to the production of a feature film chronicling their experience. Titled Grounded for Change, the movie starred A-list actors and received critical acclaim for its unflinching portrayal of systemic discrimination and the family's relentless pursuit of justice. The Johnsons were actively involved in the filmmaking process, ensuring their story was told with authenticity and respect. "This is more than entertainment," Mr. Johnson said during the film's premiere. "It's a call to action." The film became a cultural phenomenon, sparking discussions about racial equality and corporate accountability. Its success brought the Johnsons' story to an even wider audience, amplifying their message. In recognition of their efforts to combat discrimination and promote social justice, the Johnson family received several prestigious humanitarian awards. Organizations praised their courage, resilience, and commitment to creating positive change. Among the honors was the Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Award, which the family accepted with deep humility. "We never sought recognition, we just wanted to do what was right," Mrs. Johnson said during an acceptance speech. The awards solidified their status as role models, inspiring others to stand up against injustice. Despite the accolades, the family remained focused on their mission, using the platform to continue advocating for fairness and equality. In an effort to repair its tarnished reputation, the airline's new leadership initiated community outreach programs. Executives visited underserved neighborhoods, listening to residents' concerns and seeking input on how to improve their services. These visits were part of a larger strategy to demonstrate the company's commitment to inclusivity and customer satisfaction. The Johnson family cautiously supported these efforts, viewing them as a step toward reconciliation. "It's important that they're willing to engage with the communities they've neglected," Mr. Johnson said. However, he stressed the need for accountability and transparency. The outreach programs were a promising start, but the family and their supporters remained vigilant, ensuring the airline's promises translated into real change. Inspired by their family's journey, Maya and Liam launched their own advocacy projects to address issues they were passionate about. Maya created a youth-led initiative called Voices for Equality, empowering young people to speak out against injustice. Liam, meanwhile, started a program to teach children about their rights as travelers. Their projects quickly gained momentum, with schools and youth organizations across the country adopting their programs. "We're proud of what our kids are doing," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice filled with pride. "They're proof that even the youngest among us can drive meaningful change." Maya and Liam's efforts added another layer to the family's legacy, inspiring a new generation of activists. Spurred by the Johnsons' case and the ensuing public outcry, Congress passed landmark legislation mandating fair treatment for airline passengers. The new laws required airlines to adopt anti-discrimination policies, enhance employee training, and establish independent oversight committees. The Johnsons were invited to the signing ceremony, where they received a standing ovation. "This is a victory for everyone who believes in equality and justice," Mr. Johnson said, holding back tears. The legislation was hailed as a turning point in the travel industry, with advocates crediting the Johnsons for sparking the reforms. For the family, the laws symbolized the lasting impact of their fight. As their story gained international recognition, the Johnson family was invited to speak at several high-profile global conferences on racial justice. They shared their experiences and insights, emphasizing the need for systemic change in all sectors. Their speeches resonated deeply with audiences, particularly in countries where racial and social inequality remained persistent challenges. "At the heart of our journey is a universal message," Mr. Johnson said in a keynote address at a United Nations conference. "No matter where you come from, no one should be made to feel inferior because of the color of their skin." The Johnsons' presence at these global events served as a powerful reminder that the fight for justice and equality transcends borders, uniting people around the world in their shared pursuit of dignity and respect. Following the public outcry and ongoing lawsuits, the airline's stock value took a significant hit. Investors, concerned about the company's long-term reputation and financial stability, began selling off shares, leading to a sharp decline in its market value. Analysts warned that unless the airline took swift and decisive action to restore consumer confidence, it could face serious financial repercussions. For the Johnson family, the drop in stock value was bittersweet. While they had hoped the airline would face consequences for its actions, they never anticipated it would affect so many employees and stakeholders. "This isn't about making people lose their jobs. It's about holding companies accountable for their actions," Mrs. Johnson said, showing empathy for those caught in the crossfire. Despite the financial fallout, the Johnsons remained steadfast in their mission for justice. In response to the lack of accountability in industries plagued by discrimination, the Johnson family helped launch a diversity and inclusion certification program aimed at ensuring businesses meet high standards of fairness and equality. The program provided businesses with a framework for assessing and improving their diversity practices, rewarding those who showed a commitment to creating inclusive environments. This program is designed to incentivize businesses to take concrete steps toward diversity and inclusion, Mrs. Johnson explained during a press conference. The certification quickly gained popularity, with many corporations eager to demonstrate their commitment to fair practices. The Johnsons were instrumental in shaping the program, and it became a hallmark of responsible corporate behavior. Their work ensured that future generations would benefit from more inclusive workplaces and customer experiences. In a bid to promote unity and healing after their public ordeal, the Johnson family agreed to participate in a national advertising campaign designed to spread a message of togetherness and inclusivity. The campaign, called United We Rise, featured the family sharing their personal story alongside individuals from diverse backgrounds, emphasizing the strength found in diversity and the power of collective action. The campaign received widespread acclaim, earning praise for its positive and forward-thinking message. "This is bigger than just one family's experience," said Maya during the ad's release. "It's about all of us coming together to create a world where no one has to fight for basic respect." The ad campaign became a symbol of hope and solidarity, further cementing the Johnsons' place as leaders in the fight for equality. In the aftermath of their battle with the airline, the Johnson family formed strategic partnerships with some of the world's largest corporations to spearhead diversity initiatives. These collaborations focused on fostering inclusive hiring practices, promoting equal opportunities for underrepresented groups, and creating corporate environments that celebrated diversity. "We want to change the corporate culture from the inside out," Mr. Johnson said at the launch of their first initiative. The partnerships quickly yielded results, with companies reporting increased diversity in leadership and more inclusive hiring practices. The Johnsons' influence in the corporate world became a key aspect of their ongoing mission, as they worked tirelessly to reshape industries that had historically marginalized people of color. In an unprecedented move, the airline launched a public apology campaign to acknowledge the pain and suffering caused by its actions. The campaign featured heartfelt apologies from the new CEO and other key executives, alongside promises of long-term reforms. While some critics viewed the apology as a publicity stunt, many passengers appreciated the sincerity of the gesture. "We failed you, and we are deeply sorry," the CEO said in a television ad, looking directly into the camera. The apology was followed by an invitation for customers to share their experiences and feedback, signaling a shift in the airline's approach to customer service. For the Johnsons, the apology was a small but important step toward healing. "It's a start," Mrs. Johnson said, "but it's what they do next that will truly matter." In a surprising turn of events, the Johnson family decided to invest in the airline's future, purchasing a significant stake in the company. Their decision was motivated by a desire to ensure that the airline followed through on its promises of reform and accountability. They worked closely with the airline's leadership to implement best practices for diversity, inclusion, and customer care. "Sometimes, to create real change, you need to be part of the solution," Mr. Johnson explained. The family's involvement in the airline's operations sent a strong message about their commitment to ensuring that the company upheld its newfound values. Through their investment, the Johnsons hoped to guide the airline toward a more equitable and customer-centric future. After years of fighting for change within the airline industry, the Johnson family took a bold step and launched their own airline. The new airline, aptly named Equality Airways, was designed to offer an inclusive and welcoming experience for all passengers, with a strong emphasis on customer respect, fairness, and diversity. "We built this airline from the ground up with one core value in mind: equality," Mrs. Johnson said during the company's launch event. Equality Airways quickly became a hit with consumers, who appreciated the company's transparent policies and commitment to addressing discrimination in all forms. The Johnson family's new venture became a direct challenge to the status quo, offering an alternative that emphasized respect and inclusivity at every level. In the wake of the Johnson family's victory and the subsequent changes within the airline, former employees, inspired by the family's advocacy for fair treatment, organized to form a union aimed at ensuring better working conditions for all airline staff. They sought improved wages, benefits, and protection from discriminatory practices. The union also advocated for better training programs to ensure employees were equipped to treat all customers with dignity and respect. The Johnsons supported the union's efforts, recognizing that systemic change needed to extend to the workforce as well. "It's not just about the customers, it's about the people who make the company run," Mr. Johnson stated. The union quickly gained traction, and the airline was forced to negotiate with its workers, leading to an agreement that improved conditions for the staff and helped rebuild the company's reputation. The Johnsons continued to act as allies, making it clear that the fight for equality had to be inclusive at every level of society. Realizing the need for long-term cultural shifts in both the public and private sectors, the Johnson family partnered with top universities and educational institutions to develop comprehensive diversity training programs. These programs were designed to educate students, professionals, and corporate leaders about the importance of inclusivity, empathy, and unconscious bias. The Johnsons' involvement ensured the programs were not only theoretical but also practical, focusing on real-world scenarios and solutions. The goal is to educate and prepare the next generation to be leaders in a world that values every human being equally, Maya Johnson explained at the launch of the initiative. The programs quickly gained recognition for their effectiveness and were adopted by several Fortune 500 companies and government agencies. The Johnsons became known not only for their fight for justice but also for creating educational frameworks that would ensure a more equitable future. The Johnson family's mission continued to expand beyond the airline industry and into the global arena as they established a foundation dedicated to combating discrimination and advocating for human rights around the world. The Johnson Foundation for Equality focused on providing legal resources to victims of racial discrimination, supporting international initiatives to fight systemic racism, and partnering with global organizations to bring awareness to the issue. "The work we've done here is just the beginning," Mrs. Johnson said at the foundation's launch. "Racism is a global issue, and it's time to bring our fight to the world stage." The foundation's work quickly garnered international support, with leaders from multiple countries offering financial backing and solidarity. The Johnsons Foundation played a critical role in expanding the conversation about racial equality and was instrumental in initiating reforms in other countries where discrimination was deeply entrenched. In an effort to bring together activists, thought leaders, and policymakers, the Johnson family organized a national summit on racial equality. The summit was held in Washington, D.C., and featured keynote speakers from a wide array of disciplines, including law, education, business, and activism. The Johnsons themselves spoke about their journey, reflecting on how their personal battle with the airline industry had become a catalyst for broader societal change. "The purpose of this summit is not just to talk, but to take action," Mr. Johnson said. "We're here to build real solutions." The summit was a resounding success, with hundreds of participants leaving with actionable plans and strategies to address racial inequality in their respective fields. The event served as a powerful reminder that the fight for justice required ongoing, collective effort. As their influence continued to grow, the Johnson family became vocal advocates for reparations and comprehensive social justice legislation aimed at addressing the lasting effects of racial injustice. They publicly supported legislative efforts to provide compensation to communities harmed by systemic racism, including through investments in education, healthcare, and housing for marginalized groups. "We cannot undo the past, but we can change the future," Mrs. Johnson said during a rally advocating for reparations. The family's stance on reparations generated both support and criticism, but they remained undeterred, knowing that true justice required confronting uncomfortable truths. Their advocacy played a pivotal role in furthering national conversations about reparations and how governments could begin to address the generational impact of racial inequality. The Johnsons joined millions of people around the world in a historic global march for racial justice, a coordinated effort to demand systemic change and equality for all people of color. The march, which spanned continents and united diverse groups, was one of the largest demonstrations in modern history. The Johnsons marched alongside activists, citizens, and public figures, carrying signs that read, "No justice, no peace, and equality for all." "It's humbling to see so many people coming together for this cause," Mr. Johnson said during the event. "This is a movement that cannot be stopped." The march was broadcast globally, further amplifying the Johnson family's message and solidifying their role as key figures in the fight for racial justice. It became a symbol of unity and determination, inspiring individuals and organizations to take concrete actions toward dismantling racism in all its forms. In recognition of their monumental contributions to racial equality and social justice, the President of the United States awarded the Johnson family the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest civilian honor. The family was honored for their tireless work in fighting discrimination, advocating for policy reforms, and setting a global example for fairness and inclusion. "We are humbled by this recognition, but it's not about us," Mrs. Johnson said during the ceremony. "It's about every person who has ever faced discrimination and fought for their right to be seen and heard." The award ceremony was a poignant moment in the family's journey as they reflected on how far they had come, from a difficult encounter on a plane to becoming leaders in the fight for justice. The Johnsons' legacy was solidified that day, inspiring future generations to continue the fight for equality. Building on their success in the U.S., the Johnsons turned their focus to global racism, working with international organizations such as the United Nations, Amnesty International, and Human Rights Watch. Their goal was to create a global framework for combating racism in all its forms, from institutional discrimination to hate crimes. Through these partnerships, the Johnson family worked on initiatives that included educational outreach, legal reforms, and international treaties to address racial inequality worldwide. "It's not enough to fight racism in one country, it must be a global effort," Mr. Johnson stated. Their work led to the creation of several international agreements that outlined strategies for governments to take concrete actions against racial discrimination. The Johnsons became key figures in the global fight for equality, demonstrating that collective action across borders could yield significant change. As part of their commitment to creating a more inclusive future, the Johnson family established the Johnson Scholarship Fund, which was specifically designed to support young leaders of color pursuing higher education in fields such as law, social justice, politics, and education. The fund's goal was to empower the next generation of activists and professionals who would carry the torch for equality and change. The family was deeply involved in the selection process, ensuring that the fund went to individuals with a passion for racial justice and a clear vision for creating systemic change. "We want to provide opportunities for young people who are committed to making the world a better place," Maya Johnson explained during the scholarship launch event. The scholarship quickly became one of the most prestigious opportunities for students of color, and recipients were not only financially supported but also mentored by prominent leaders in their respective fields. Over time, the fund became a cornerstone in the Johnsons' legacy, shaping the future of racial justice and helping to cultivate a network of passionate, educated, and committed individuals dedicated to making a difference. The impact of the Johnson family's work reverberated far beyond their immediate victories in the airline industry. Their actions ignited a movement that inspired countless activists and leaders around the world. Young people took to the streets, to social media, and to the halls of power, motivated by the Johnsons' example of perseverance, advocacy, and leadership. The family's story became a symbol of the possibility of change and the power of standing up against injustice, regardless of the obstacles in the way. In schools, universities, and community organizations, the Johnsons' journey was taught as a case study in overcoming adversity. "The Johnsons showed us that we all have the power to change the world," said one university professor in a lecture on social movements. Their story became a beacon of hope, particularly for communities of color, who saw in the Johnsons not just a family who faced discrimination, but one who turned their pain into power and changed the course of history. The Johnsons' legacy of activism, compassion, and courage continues to inspire future generations to fight for justice, equality, and a world free from racism.